Hello everyone, I'm Professor Paul Carrier of the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School, and today I'd like to provide a little bit of information regarding the materials assigned for Class 7 of our sales class. Okay? First, let's go remind ourselves what we did last time. Last time we took a look at where there is a forgery of a drawer signature and which party should be the most responsible. And that's the drawee bank, which has a signature card and has an agreement with the drawer only to properly pay the negotiable instruments that come out. Keep in mind it does work as well with a maker of a note and who's responsible for his or her own signature if it's mistaken and goes out. But typically, and certainly on law school exams, professors only deal with the check, which is a draft. And so we're looking at the drawee bank. And so if I mention drawee bank, keep thinking that way, but keep in mind that the same rules could apply to the actual maker of a promissory note. It's just not all that common, and so it's not that often addressed. Okay, so problem with the drawer signature, it should be the drawee bank's problem. Okay, what if it is an alteration of the payee when the check is already on its way out? Or if it's an alteration at some point when the check is already out, the drawer bank has no control over that, doesn't have a signature card, and doesn't really have any more information typically than anyone else down the chain. So perhaps the responsibility for risk of loss is on those parties taking it after that point, because they are in the best position to prevent a forgery of the payee name, to prevent the alteration of $10 to $10,000. Okay? Not a drawee bank where the negotiable instrument is now moving down the chain where the drawee bank doesn't see it, doesn't know what's going on to it, and is not holding a signature card, for example. Okay? So we see a preference for drawee bank liability for the forgery of a drawer signature, and there is a preference for the liability to lie with other parties, not the drawee bank, where it is a forgery of payee signature, the forgery of other endorsements to subsequent transferees, or an alteration of the check after it's been circulated the first time, changing it, for example, from $10 to $10,000. And then that should be the responsibility, typically, of the parties that are first taking that instrument with that mistake in it, because they are the best ones to try and prevent that. You see a friend of yours has a check, and he tries to collect $10,000 off of you, and you know that he's unemployed, and no one's going to give him $10,000. You might say, wait a second, I got to make a phone call. How could you get a $10,000 check? I need to know more about this. A drawee bank wouldn't know that. You would. And that means the responsibility perhaps should be on you. But we learned today in week 7 materials that the responsibility for these mistakes might involve comparative fault now, which is perhaps a good thing. If you can prove that one party was more responsible for the fault, allowed the forgery or the alteration or the mistake to be perpetrated on other parties, and could have, should have prevented it, then it may be fully responsible or it may be partially responsible. You may see an example where the depository bank is 50% responsible for this problem, but the drawee bank actually could have, should have known better, and it too, because it paid first, and could have stopped, dropped, and rolled, could have checked the problem first, but paid, should have done that as well. And we can actually assess fault 80-20, 60-40, 50-50. Okay? Which is a relatively interesting phenomenon, which you can see simply tries to make things a little bit more equitable rather than stick the drawee bank for full responsibility, or at least risk. Remember, responsibility is on the party who made the mistake. But risk of covering that responsibility, if the wrongdoer is not collectible, should fall where? And with drawer signatures, it's typically on drawee bank. Drawee bank. And for other problems, not drawer signature forgeries, it should lie with the people within that chain, the entities within the chain, including a depository bank, of transfer prior to the presentment back to the drawee bank, where the cash is waiting to be paid at the drawer's insistence. Okay? You've got transfer warranties as soon as a payee signs and either deposits it or transfers it for value to, for example, recipient 1. We have what looks like a negotiation. In fact, it is. We've got a mistake at that point. If we do, then that person is the one who has violated a transfer warranty by doing something wrong. For example, forging the payee signature. Or it even could be a payee changing 10 to 10,000. then that would be a transfer warranty made to recipient 1. If recipient 1 transfers to recipient 2, that is also a transfer warranty. If recipient 2 transfers to recipient 3, that's a transfer warranty. If recipient 3 puts it in his own bank, a depository bank, that is a transfer warranty. If the depository bank now puts it through the federal collection system to get it back to the drawee bank for ultimate payment out of the drawer's account, that is a presentment event. That is a presentment warranty. And we say, if it's this party on the presentment point, where the drawee bank sees the problem and tries to make it someone else's fault because it's not a forgery of the drawer's signature, that drawee bank can sue the payee if he made the mistake, right? On a on a presentment warranty, or recipient 1 on a presentment warranty, or recipient 2 on the presentment warranty, or recipient 3 on the presentment warranty, or the depository bank on the presentment warranty. Okay, so those parties, they make a transfer warranty this way, but they have also made presentment warranties back to the drawee bank going the other way once the presentment has been made. Okay, and if there's been a presentment warranty and it's been successful, it's been paid off and discharged, and somebody, perhaps the depository bank, is stuck with that payment, now that the presentment's out of the way, those parties now, if the drawee bank is now out of the picture for some reason, it's been paid off or found not responsible, well, then those parties duking it out as between each other will do so on transfer warranties, not presentment. In other words, the drawee bank is the one that can bring up the presentment warranty claim against any party in the chain. Other parties, as between themselves, work on transfer warranties. And both warranties are relatively similar, but if you take a close look, you can see that the presentment warranty seems to make the drawee bank not responsible for forgeries and alterations from the payee or later endorsements or alterations. Okay, and so the transfer warranty tends to make the forgery of the drawer signature the primary risk assessing or risk responsibility of the drawee bank. Okay? So hopefully that gives you a sense of at least there are some different warranties and who the parties are suing between them, plus as well the public policy. If obviously you want to make the wrongdoer mostly responsible when you can. If you cannot, however, and it has to stick with the bank, then you want to make the drawee bank responsible for forgeries involving the drawer, and you want to make the depository bank generally responsible for risk of loss if it involves something after the drawer's signature. Okay, and keep in mind again that there may be some comparative fault involved, and so a jurisdiction may be able to find a 60-40, a 50-50 split on liability in such cases. Now, what we look at today is the rule that the drawee bank is responsible for forgeries of drawer signature is relatively harsh. And the case law jurisdictions have begun to lighten up a little bit to find other parties partially or fully responsible for that problem, okay? Because maybe the drawee bank really was not in a good position to fix this. It's actually the fault of somebody else. For example, if the owner of a company leaves the checks out, writes everything but the signature, leaves his pen he usually signs with, right? And he's seen his employees sign his name a few times so it looks the same. Isn't that responsible person at the employer helping to assist the forgery of his own drawer signature? And the answer to that is yes. So maybe the responsibility would go on somebody else, not the drawee bank, but in fact the drawer, employer, who's actually helped to facilitate the problem. So we have common law validation. If you have an agent that signs for you all the time, and he or she does it again at a time you didn't like it, that's your fault. You knew it happens regularly. You let people believe that it was okay, and so you have to be careful not to create actual or apparent authority in your agents to sign your drawer signature. If you do, you might be the one responsible for the loss and not the drawee bank. And then you can go sue the employee who made the mistake, okay? But you're out of pocket if that person is not collectible. There's the imposter rule. If an imposter truly fools, no, let me change that. If an imposter makes a fool of the drawer, right? I say that I'm saving elephants, and I'm Joe Elephant Saver. Could you write me a $10,000 check to Joe Elephant Saver? I'm not Joe Elephant Saver, okay? And I'm hoodwinking you into signing it. That's your fault, not the drawy banks, right? You should have known better to see I was a hoodwinker, I was a charlatan, and because you signed it, I fooled you to sign it into me, then it should be your responsibility and not the drawy banks. Okay, so that's the concept of an imposter rule. Okay? The employee forgery rule is another one out there in many jurisdictions, recognized as well in UCC Article 3. If an employer, who's then the drawer, makes it somewhat easy for his or her employees to hoodwink the system, that should be the employer's problem, not the drawy bank's problem. And that is good policy because it makes employers who are drawers a little bit more careful, right? Rather than foist all these losses on a drawy bank, maybe the employer should use a little bit of ordinary care not to let people forge their own signatures. Okay? There's a negligence rule, and it's a comparative fault idea. If the drawy bank is somewhat responsible for negligence because it knew something was not quite right and it could have fixed it, but a depository bank took a forgery and even had a better position to know it, but both sides kind of should have known better and did not act with the proper reasonable care. We'll talk about that standard in a minute. Then each side may be fully or at least partially responsible, and we don't stick it to one side only or the other side only. Okay? Bank statement rule. If the bank provides you with information with regard to your account, including canceled checks, and you don't check them for frauds or alterations, and then notify of those frauds and alterations, it becomes your problem, not the drawy banks. In other words, the drawy banks can get rid of their liability to you for forgeries and alterations if they provide you with enough information for you to check yourself, you don't check it yourself, and warn in time. So, for example, if you don't check your statements and find a problem and notify within 6 months, that's your fault, no longer the bank's. Your drawy bank should be absolved of responsibility. Okay, now very quickly, there's not a lot of time. Common law validation is the Hertz case. This woman hired a lawyer. He's the one who did the forgery. She was responsible for that forgery, not Hertz, and not the company, not the bank that paid on it, because she should not have had an attorney who was a shyster. And we're sorry for her, but it's certainly not the drawy bank's fault. Okay, that's really more her problem than someone else's problem. The state check cashing company. That's the 444 imposters. If somebody is hoodwinked by the imposter, that should be the responsibility of the person hoodwinked, not his or her bank. So the drawy bank can avoid liability if the bank can show that the actual party who signed the check, and it was properly signed, but to the wrong party, right? The payee was bizarre. Then in that case, that is a problem of the person signing the check, not the drawy bank. Okay, so with regard to an imposter, where the drawer should have prevented it, then we don't foist primary responsibility on a drawy bank. Okay, even for and as well for things like forgeries or wrong payees. Okay. Well, there's when we get to the actual class, I'll talk about there's a clawback provision in 404D, 3-404D, or yes, 3. Employee forgery rule. If an employer makes it somewhat simple for an employee to forge, then it might be the employer's fault and not a drawy bank's fault. Okay? And you look at the level to which there is negligence on one side or the other. And I think that the standard for that kind of care is probably in the Clement case. I'm trying to find it. I will point it out with specificity during Class 7. Okay? Clementi Brothers Contracting Company, or Corporation. Anyway, I'm not sure how helpful this is. Keep in mind who should be primarily responsible. Keep in mind who shouldn't be. Keep in mind how you can try and transfer liability, or at least split it between the 2 different or 3 different parties who might have allowed the mistake. And we'll try to clarify in more detail during class.